So, welcome back to How to Be a Great Teacher, and this is video number 4, where we talk about universal fears. Now, what's really interesting about fear is that it's something that affects all of us, every human, regardless. It affects the teachers and affects the students. And they've been able to break it down into having overall 3 fears that kind of determine what it is that we do and why we do things, or more importantly, what stops us from moving forward. So the 3 fears are the fear of not being good enough, the fear of not belonging, and the fear of not being loved. I'll start with fear number 1, the fear of not being good enough, and explain why this is so important. For teachers, this tends to be a really strong fear. If you think about it, teachers tend to build their careers almost on getting to that point where they're always right, that they always have the right answers, because what would happen if you turn up into a class and you don't have the answers? Well, what I'd encourage you to do is to get to that point where you're okay coming into class and it's perfectly okay for you not to know all the answers, because that's where the learning happens. So for teachers, the fear of not being good enough is something that really stops them from moving forward. For you to be a great teacher, you need to really embrace this. Teachers tend to, as a generalization, be scared of making mistakes or putting themselves out there. And again, it comes back to the idea of you feel like you're being judged. If you think about it this way, most teachers will set a task or an assessment, and what they're effectively doing is that they're getting that work back from the student, and then they're marking and making judgments upon what the student's work is. And for a student, from a student's point of view, that can be something that's very intimidating, to the point that they stop themselves from doing the best that they can because they're too scared to put in their best effort and still not get a great result. And what would that mean? Well, for teachers, we tend to avoid making mistakes and avoid putting ourselves out there where we're going to be judged and critiqued by our students, by our peers, and by the greater public around us. So it's really important that the fear of not being good enough doesn't stop you from doing those things. Because what's going on in your mind, in the background of what's going on in the teacher's mind, is what if you embarrass yourself, or what if you're not good enough? What if a student thinks that you suck, that you're just no good at whatever it is that you're presenting? What if you put your time and effort into your work and the people around you say it's no good? So what ends up happening is that this fear of not being good enough stops us from considering any of the positives, simply because we're too scared about all of these possible outcomes. And what's really important about this is that this fear stops us from growing. It's only through pushing through the fear that we're able to grow and move on. So that's fear number 1, the fear of not being good enough. Fear number 2, which is the fear of not belonging, really applies, we see this in students quite a bit, where students will want to be so much part of a group that they do silly things in order to stay in the group, because the biggest fear that they've got is being pushed out of a group. We see this in the playground all the time, where you ask a student, hey, why did you do this? And they'll say, oh, I'm not too sure. It's because everyone else told me to. What's really happening unconsciously is that they are so afraid of doing something that goes against the group or the community, that they'll do something that goes against their better judgment just to stay in. And ultimately, all these fears can be grouped together with the fear of not being loved. Now, think about it this way. From a student's point of view, they let's say they submit a piece of work and they get whatever mark they get out of it, right? So let's say they get 7 out of 10, and they take it home to their parents and they show their parents and say, hey, I've got this task, I've got 7 out of 10. And the parents might critique them, might criticize them, might say, hey, well, obviously you should have done better because you should have gotten 10 out of 10. Unconsciously, what's really happening is that the student's looking at this and thinking to themselves, what do I need to do to get approval from my parents? So imagine if that's a signal that a student's getting, and it's a signal that a teacher is giving to their student inadvertently as well, then the fear of not being loved or being appreciated or being wanted is something that becomes really, really strong. So again, from a student's point of view, the reason that it's important for us to be great teachers and to overcome our fears is because by us overcoming our fears, we're able to show the students that it's okay to be vulnerable, it's okay to make mistakes, it's okay to put yourself out there, because that's where the learning happens. When we don't do that, the students feel constantly judged by their teachers and by their parents. It's like they can't do anything right because we're always judging and marking them. They often feel that they are not good enough unless they get an A or unless they get 100 out of 100. Now think about it this way. This may well apply to you, but it certainly applies to me and quite a few of the students that I've taught before, where they'll get 99%. They take it home and say, "Hey, mum and dad, I got 99%," and the parent comes back by asking, "Well, why did you miss? Where did that last mark go? What didn't you do? You should have worked harder." Alternatively, the student does get 100%, and the parent looks at it and goes, "Oh, that's really good. Well, obviously it was an easy test." In each case, they're not validating the student's effort. How can the student feel like they're being validated if, as teachers, we're not putting ourselves through the same process so they can see that it's okay to not get full marks, or if you do get full marks, that you celebrate it and you congratulate and validate yourself? Sometimes our students feel that they're not loved unless they are perfect, and as I discussed a moment ago, that just doesn't work. Think of perfection as being an illusion that you're always chasing, but you never quite get there because there's always something that you can improve. So if you are waiting to feel loved only when you've achieved perfection, that means that by default, you're never really going to feel that love, and you're going to act out of fear of not feeling the love from the people around you. So a really strong driver. For teachers, they don't see their making mistakes. Sorry, for students, I should say. They don't see their teachers making mistakes and being imperfect. So if the teacher's not doing it and they're not getting from home, where does a student understand that it's okay to make mistakes? And the short answer is that they don't. So they put so much pressure on themselves to achieve, which is again why it's so important for us teachers to, even if we have a fear ourselves of putting a piece of work out there, of writing an article for a journal, of writing our own novels, of creating our own piece of music, that we put it out there and we allow the students to see us actively showing our vulnerabilities and showing that, hey, we don't have all the answers, and showing that we're trying our best. If that's the model that they get, that means that they're more likely to follow in those footsteps. They don't see their teachers being prepared to go through the same process that students go through. So what can happen quite commonly is that teachers put students through a process, like you have to sit this exam, but the teachers aren't going through that process themselves. They're kind of, this happens to us as music teachers, where we say to the students, you need to compose a piece of music, but how many of the teachers are actually composing a piece of music with the students to show them that they're going through the process as well? So what's really important to recap is that we have these three universal fears of the fear of not being good enough, the fear of not belonging, and the fear of not being loved. What's important in this is that not that they're there, it's how we react and how we respond to them. Because the difference between people that are very successful and people that are fulfilled is that they still have the same fears, but they still push through and act through it anyway. Susan Jeffers, in her book Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway, really elaborates on this point and talks about the idea that fear is around us all the time and we get to choose how we respond to it. Do we put ourselves in a really safe environment, well within our comfort zone, where we don't have any fear, which means that we can't grow? Or do we understand that the journey to growth and the journey to being happy and the journey to being our best is going to involve doing things that are going to challenge you and push you well outside your comfort zone? And if that's the case, you're going to feel some fear and some resistance along the way. And importantly, it's the understanding that that's exactly where you push through those fears. You don't let the fear control your decisions. If our students are seeing us as teachers pushing through our own fears and our own vulnerabilities, it's going to mean that they're more likely to do the same. Thanks for watching. Come back and watch the next video.